once we decided we were gonna get deer on the farm, the next step was containing them, building a fence. It's going to be a little more of a technical video, not as much excitement as you're going to see in the future, but I think it's useful because it gives you an idea of the amount of work it took, and some people are just interested in how all this gets set up.
It's essentially preventative.
Back out in the deer pen. Brendan Compton, welcome back to BRC Fallow Deer. And it's unbelievable. It's like 70 degrees. It's late October. A south wind, which is really killing me. My hunting spot really needs a north wind, and this buck has been taunting me on these south wind days. So I'm out here in the pen instead. Yeah, we've got whitetails in Kansas, and we like to hunt them and we like to eat them. Again, hope you'll see more. You'll see some venison cooking and recipes and things along the way. If you've ever had somebody say, you can't eat venison, it tastes bad, it's because they don't know how to cook. Over the years, most people cut a steak, throw it on the grill, and overcook it, take a bite, and go, man, that tastes like shoe leather. Well, yeah, if I took a ribeye and say threw it on a grill or threw it in a smoker and cooked it to 200 degrees like you would cook a brisket, it would also taste like shoe leather. So learn how to cook. I can make deer that you wouldn't never know it was deer. There's so many great recipes out there, and we'd like to get into a little bit of that because people need to know there's alternative to beef. I'm not against beef. We sell beef. We have cattle. But, for somebody looking for a leaner option, venison's a great option. They sell a lot of it in other countries. I've heard there's a lot of it sold in cities in the U.S. But most of the venison sold in the U.S. comes from overseas because we don't have enough supply to keep up with the demand. Anyway, eat venison. So, out in the pen, I want to talk about the fence today. There were a couple different options when it came to what kind of fencing and wire we were going to use. What we ended up with was what they call high tensile fixed knot, and I think woven wire is the same thing. So fixed knot high tensile fencing, and the kind we got, they call it 2096-6. What that means is, on the wire, there's 20 horizontal wires from top to bottom, and initially they're spaced, I think, 6 inches down to 4, and then they're 3-inch spacing on the bottom. So 20 horizontal wires, 96 inches tall, and the -6 is a 6-inch spacing between vertical stays, or between the vertical wires. So you could get 12-inch spacing or 3-inch spacing. We got 6. It's fixed knot fencing because where the vertical stay and the horizontal wire cross, they aren't actually connected. There's I don't know if you can see it, but there's a what they call a fixed knot. It's a separate piece of wire that basically ties them together in a way that they won't slip. So you can't push down on this and pull the knot down. Nothing's going to break. On a welded wire, if you do that, you're going to break the weld, and then it's permanently damaged. So that's the kind of wire. And then the high tensile, that's just a high carbon content. The way that this fence maintains its strength and shape is because of the high tensile. A low tensile wire, like your traditional low tensile barbed wire or electric fence wire, it stretches, and that might sound like it's a good thing in a fence, but the problem with it is once it stretches, it stays stretched, and that's why guys are always having to re-tension their barbed wire fences, is because a deer hits it or a cow hits it, and that stretches that wire. And the only way to get the fence back into appropriate condition is to retension the barbed wire. Because this high tensile wire doesn't stretch, or doesn't stretch very much, the way that, if you just put up one solid straight piece of high tensile wire and something hits it, it's probably going to break it because it doesn't stretch. The way this wire is designed is it has these little, I call them hitches, but little kink in the wire, and it's on every 6 inches on every horizontal piece of wire. So if something hits this fence, what happens is it straightens this kink out. So, and obviously it's spread out along the whole length of the fence, so you would never see it on one individual kink, but that allows this wire, I can push into this. I could probably drive a vehicle into this and it's not going to break, because it just temporarily straightens out that kink. And then again, a property of the high tensile is its memory. It's almost like spring steel. That kink returns to its original shape. So that was a little bit of a learning process, kind of figuring out how to tension this wire. I've put up a lot of barbed wire that you kind of have to stretch the wire, and you stretch it and stretch it and stretch it until you feel like you're going to break it, and then over time that wire gets loose again and an animal hits it and it stretches it more. This wire is not that way. You basically, what they tell you to do is to tension this until the kink or the hitch is down to about half its normal height or original height. So you're pulling that kink a little bit straight so that there's good tension on the wire, but not so much that it doesn't have any give left. So to me that seemed pretty tight. I did this by myself. I don't know that I did it correctly, but it seems tight enough that nothing's gonna get tangled up in it, but not so tight that there isn't any give left, or that it's in danger of breaking. So that's the wire. That unfortunately we ended up buying a lot of this during the COVID Biden price inflation mess, and so we paid a lot for the wire, but it is what it is. Our next big issue was the land that we're on is extremely rocky, and it's not gravel, it's large rocks, and you're going to see some of that throughout these videos. I tried digging some holes with the tractor and an auger, and it just made, I went 2 inches down and stopped. Here's an example. This is just a rock that, I don't know, we pulled out from some project, and that's a small one. I've got some car-sized rocks that came out of a ditch for a water line. Well, that's what I'm dealing with under the surface. So when it came time to install corners, I went with steel pipe. Again, there's going to be people who tell me I did this all wrong and it's going to fail, and I'm lucky I didn't die, whatever, that's fine. Next time I need a fence built, I'll just call you. So I used metal pipe on the corners, new pipe. I looked at oil field pipe, and there wasn't a lot of cost savings, and right or wrong, I did what I did. But the corners have to be, obviously, the pipe has to be into the ground. And in our case, there was no, at least I don't think there was any chance of driving the pipe. A lot of people use a skid steer mounted attachment that'll drive the post into the ground. It's possible it could have been done, but some of this rock, it's solid rock for as far as I can go. So 4 feet of solid rock, I just don't know that was going to be a feasible option. And there's no rental unit, that I could try it. So we ended up drilling all of the corners, all of the metal posts, all the braces with a rock bit. Now, on the original fence, I had somebody come out and do it. I couldn't find a rock auger that I could rent. Every rental place said, yeah, people are too hard on them, they're too expensive, they don't last. So they'd rent me a skid steer and the drive unit, but not the actual auger. So I found a guy that had one, a 12, it might have been a 14-inch bit. He came out and drilled my original holes for the original perimeter fence. And that worked okay. It cost some money, obviously, and it took a lot of time. So I got that part done. But when it came time for additional fencing, dividing fences, making smaller pins, I didn't think that was going to be a long-term option because of the cost. What I ended up doing was I bought a rock auger that was a little bit smaller. It's a 6-inch bit, so it should go faster, doesn't take near as much concrete to fill the hole, and I'm drilling into solid rock, so I can't imagine there's much difference in strength. The concrete is just part of the big rock. Again, it's not gravel, it's boulders. So I bought the bit, and it wasn't cheap. It was like $1,000, but rented the skid steer. It's a couple $100 for a day. If you do it right, you get the Sunday free, and in the first project, that paid off. I used my own bit, I used my own time, wasn't paying someone else labor, and I saved a lot in concrete. So that's what I'm doing in the future anyway, is try to save money on labor, even if it means I have to buy some equipment. Plus, get to run an air-conditioned skid steer for a couple of days. That's okay. So, back to the original fencing. Initially it was 5 acres, give or take. It might be 5.5. It was kind of a square shape with a catch pin in the corner. And when we first got into this project, that was kind of what I envisioned. One big pin, let the deer in there, pull fawns off, sell yearlings, whatever. I didn't anticipate having multiple pins and ending up as deep into this as I did. But after I got the initial pin built, I kind of, explored other, you can AI breed fallow deer and you can bring in other genetics, and there's more to it than there can be more to it than just dumping animals out in a pen and letting them just do their own thing out there. Now, there doesn't have to be. They're pretty tough animals. They'll fend for themselves. And there's everything from animals left into 1,000-acre pens to just live or whatever, down to animals in 1/4 and 1/2 acre pens, and everything in between. So it can be very hands-off, and it can be very work-intensive. It just kind of depends on what your operation is and what your plans are. So initially I planned on 5-acre pen, and that was it. Well, long story short, I ended up dividing the pens later into four kind of main pens plus the corner catch. They're about 1 acre to 1.25 acres. I kind of had to, they're not all the exact same size. My idea was kind of like spokes on a wheel. If I've got a square pin in the corner or a catch pin in the corner and kind of radial dividing fences coming out of it, it kind of funnels the deer into that corner catch. I basically have to treat that corner catch like most farms treat an alleyway. So it's not really used for deer, it's only used to facilitate moving deer. Again, I don't know, this is unproven. So far, I like it. I can come out here by myself and get the deer into the corner pin pretty much without issue. Is it better or worse than a normal traditional square pin set up with a long alleyway in between? I don't know, but that's what I did. You guys want to see some deer? Here's your first look. I don't know what to think of me walking around the pin with a camera. So once we had those posts in, you have to have bracing, or like an H brace, a lot of people call it. So kind of two posts with a pipe going between the two. And if you're doing, if there's a gate like here, that pipe is way up in the air. That was my next hurdle. Again, I did almost all of this by myself, driving my own tractor, doing it all myself. I did have one guy driving a tractor for me when I was driving T-posts, just some of the T-posts, like one line, just to save time. And we got my 4-year-old on the tractor, and that we'll talk about that later. So, that thing's way up in the air. If this fence is 8 feet, top of that is 8 feet, that's another 30 inches up, so 10.5 feet maybe, and it's welded. So that was my struggle. How do I get up there? How do I hold the pipe? And then somehow I got to weld it while I'm there. So one of the things I had left from a project we had at the house, I put solar panels in at the house. Maybe we'll talk about that someday, but on a residential scale, if you've got the room, not to put them on your roof preferably, it's a great thing. We save a ton of money. I only did it for the money savings. Different conversation. On a commercial scale, I have no opinion. So I had this big pallet left over, a wooden pallet from when the panels showed up in the mail, and I've got a welder, and I've got a 220 welder, and I've got a generator. So what I did was I just threw the generator and the welder on that pallet, and with the tractor and all that allowed me to get high enough to weld the pipes on. Now that pallet was wooden, and it was not a very good pallet. It was kind of designed for a one-way trip, and it lasted for a little while, several corners, several projects. But I'll put a picture of it up here when I'm working on that gate I just showed you, that overhead pipe for the gate. It worked fine, but one day I stepped on the corner and it cracked while I was 10 feet up in the air, enough that I decided it was time for a better solution. So I got a bunch of metal and basically made myself a metal version of the same thing. So it's actually pretty lightweight, but rectangular tubing pallet essentially. Put the equipment on it, and of course it goes on the pallet forks on the tractor. It's kind of sort of custom made for the way the generator sits and whatever. That's worked great. That has enabled me to drive posts, to weld. I've used that all across the farm. It's not a portable welder. I mean, it's not a stick welder that's got a generator built in that has gobs and gobs of power. But for what I'm doing, it's worked great. It's been fun. And with the generator, I can run the grinder. I can run any piece of equipment. I've used that a ton. This has been great. Again, the safety police are gonna, I'm sure, crucify me for it, but come build a fence for me. So that's worked out well. That got me up high, and I kind of learned over time how I can hold this. If you haven't figured out, this is a long project. When you work by yourself, you can't yell at the labor, so that saves time. I mean, you can, but pointless. That saves time, and but it's slow. It's slow. One of my issues was holding the pipe. I used clamps at one point. I used a lot of clamps, a lot of vice grips by myself. But I used clamps at one point to hold the pipe, but then kind of getting it level didn't work real well. And what I figured out was, I'll put a couple pictures up, but if I figured out the height that I wanted the pipe at, I basically put a pin, welded a pin to the vertical pipe in one end, like you're going to see here. And then on the other end, I just put a C-clamp around the vertical pipe, and the horizontal would sit on that. And that worked great. I could slide the pipe in the pin, slide it on the pin, and then just set it on that C-clamp, and I'm hands-free, 2 hands for welding. So I figured out a lot of ways to get by myself, working by myself. Becky will help when she can, but there's always kids, and this is about as much help as the kids are. So that's the fence. I'm going to put a bunch of videos up on, you know, how it went up and the process of stretching it and some of that. On the corners, or at the wire termination, you do what's called a high tensile slip knot. Now I think I got a video, kind of a close-up of me tying this knot off. It allows the wire to slip, so it's tied in a way that it can't really come untied, and if something does hit the wire, it'll pull that knot a little bit tighter rather than the wire breaking down the run. It's just, again, it's kind of like the little hitches in the wire. It's just kind of a little extra insurance that the one downside of high tensile is it doesn't stretch, so you have to take that into account and give it a way to straighten, I guess is the word, temporarily straighten. So what I typically did was tied off corners with those high tensile slip knots, and I got much better as I tied more of them. Very sore hands, and it takes very thick gloves. Yeah, the wire gets pretty sharp, so I wore out some really thick leather gloves a couple times. Down toward the bottom, where the spacing is only 3 inches, I had a lot of trouble getting my hand in there. I could do it, but the tag on the wire had to be so short. It took me just as long to do the last 6 wires as it did to do the entire rest of the fence. So I ran across a product, another Gripple product called a T-clip, or I think it's called T-clip. And what that T-clip or T-gripple is, kind of holds the wire in a T shape. And the way that it works is the wire comes in the end, you go around the post, wire comes in the end, and there's a ceramic gear or a roller inside that once the wire is pulled through, it can't come back out. So you basically run the wire around the end, put the clip on, put the 2 ears around your original run of the wire, and pull it tight. Now I fold the tail end back under. I don't know, it's just something so there's not a sharp point there, and another way to keep the wire from backing out. But I use those things on the bottom portion of the fence where the spacing is so tight, and then I also used it in a couple places where, like here, I didn't really have room to tie a knot because there's a pipe right there. So they are kind of expensive. I think it was like $1.50 a piece, maybe a little less. So I don't know, you could do all the wire, you could use them on all the wires, but honestly I got so quick with tying a termination knot that I saved the $1.50 where I could. But I just used them again where I couldn't get my hands, where I didn't have room to tie a knot, and I think in that case they're great. I never had any issues with them. So I think it's a great tool if you're tying off a knot like this and you don't have room to work. The T-posts, that's a whole different ball game right there. So they're 10-foot tall T-posts. So kind of the same thing. You know, I had to use a platform on the tractor to even get high enough to drive these posts in. I did a lot of it by myself. I'd climb up and down the tractor, climb up the arms of a loader, drive a post in, climb back down, drive up the next spot, climb back up. I did a lot of that. Again, working by myself is slow. Toward the end, I'll show you a video. I eventually got my 4-year-old where he could drive the tractor. He's very meticulous. He would, again, safety police are going to go nuts. I don't care. He does fine. He knows what to touch. He knows what to not touch, and he did great. So I only would use it, in straight runs where he's not going to hit anything. He can't hurt himself. And worst case, I jump off the platform and I'm going to be fine. Anyway, it worked out fine. No issues. So I'll put that video up toward the end for entertainment value.
The state of Kansas requires a fallow deer fence to be how tall? "6 feet tall. However, we would recommend 8-foot tall fencing, as this allows for a larger margin of security, as well as the ability to house different species in the future."
The process of putting that wire up, there's a lot of force pulled when you're pulling to splice the wire together. I ended up using, some people use a come along, like a regular cable come along. The problem with that is you have to stretch so far that the spool doesn't have enough room to hold the amount of cable it would take. So a lot of people use what's called a chain walker. You'll see that in the video. The upside is it doesn't hold the chain. I mean, it holds the chain, but once it pulls against the chain and it doesn't need that tail anymore, it's just dropped free. So you could theoretically walk an infinite distance with one chain walker. The downside to them is the minimum amount you can, each, like on a come along, that ratcheting system, you can ratchet a little bit, ratchet a little more. The chain walker kind of has to go an entire link, and so it's a little less finesse. But I was able to apply, and you can't apply quite as much force, I don't think, but you almost have to have them if you're going to do longer runs of this fixed knot fencing, just because you have to stretch so far. Stretch isn't the right word, but you have to tension so much distance. So yeah, I ended up buying 2 chain walkers, and then I did use a ratcheting come along in the middle once I got the stretcher bars kind of tight enough where I could use the come along. But man, it's a lot of force, pulling those things as hard as you can. I kept thinking at some point something's got to slip, but nothing ever did. And I don't know, I guess you can't stretch that wire too tight, not with the tools I was using anyway. But it was a learning experience where something I'd never done before, and it wasn't hard work. See another deer back there. That's a special buck. You'll learn more about him later. Come out for us. Yeah, there he goes. So yeah, it was quite the learning experience. When I did the 4 dividing pins, or the 4 smaller pins within the larger perimeter fence, I think it was actually Becky's idea. She said, why don't you put a gate back in the back corner? And so if we've got deer, say, in the corner catch pen, but we need to move from one pin to another, we could run them through the back corner, the back side of the pin, instead of having to deal with that. So one of the pins, I probably should have done it on all the pins, but one of the pins has a big gate in the back. That's actually, I've already used it because of the shape of one of the 2 pins that shares that gate. It funnels very well to the catch pin, and the one next to it kind of doesn't, just because of the way that the shape works out. so I can kind of run deer out one, move the deer over to that, the original pen and run them out again. It works really well. So that's pretty much the fence. It was a major undertaking. I spent a lot of time on the tractor with earbuds in and driving posts, and I'm not going to say it was really hard work, because hard work is putting roofs on and construction every single day, 10 hours a day in the summer. That's hard work. It was just kind of, there were 1,000 steps, and I started at step 1, and when I finished step 1 I did step 2, and pretty soon I was at step 50, and it just kept going from there. So it was just kind of, I guess tedious is the word, but it took a lot of paying attention, and I'm glad that this part of the fence is done. I'm already thinking about plans to expand, but for now we're just going to stick with what we got. So that's the fence. Again, it's a little more of a technical video than there's some really interesting stuff coming up, much more exciting, hands on the deer. You're going to get a lot more up close and personal with the animals and some of the working system and some of the more cool stuff. So if you stuck with me through this video, I don't know, hit the like and subscribe button down here somewhere, and stick around, because the best is definitely has yet to come. So thanks again for watching. See you next time. Go! Hey, backwards! Okay, stop.